Welcome. Good morning, everyone. We are very happy to have you all here on this panel session on gender perspective to road safety solutions. I'm Carla Gonzalez with the World Bank, and today I will be the moderator of the session. Let me introduce the panelists. Elizabeth Porcha from Porcha Associates will be our keynote speaker, the expert. She's a professor and researcher at Imperial College with more than 20 years of experience. Agnes Binagwahu, Vice Chancellor of University of Global Health in Rwanda, also former Minister of Health. Welcome, Agnes. Nan Tran, Head of Safety and Mobility from WHO. I believe everyone knows already Nan in this room. Leah Shoham, Founder and Executive Director of Vision Zero Network. And of course, Matthias Landgren, State Secretary from Government of Sweden. Thank you very much, all of you, to be here with us today. So before we heard from Elizabeth, let me just open up by saying that 74% of all road traffic deaths occurred to men. So why do we want to underline the importance of gender in the road safety agenda? This is a question that we are going to try to answer today in this panel, hoping that when we finish, you will see the importance of paying attention to the needs and different solutions for the 50% of the population around the world today. So with no further introduction, please, Elizabeth, join us here.
Thank you. Thank you, Carla. Well, thank you very much for coming to this important session. If I can have my slides, please. So this is the title of my talk, Correcting Gender Biases and Gaps in Knowledge and Standards for Equality in Road Safety, which actually tells you exactly that there is no equality in safety for women and men. And I'll explain why. So there are so many things that actually we know about. We know about that the roads were designed by men for men because men used to drive. Women didn't drive. Now the studies looked at the patterns of mobility for women and men, and there are differences. And women do take more of public transport, but they also do things like going to dropping off children to school before they go to work, dropping mother to hospital, and maybe also doing some shopping afterwards. So the patterns of mobility are different. Roads were definitely not designed for the growing population of elderly people. All cars are tested on male crash test dummies. There is not a full female crash test dummy that we use for testing safety of cars. So of course things like pregnancy is not accounted for. And the patterns of injury between what actually happens in the road and what happens in the lab do not match for women. Of course they wouldn't match for women because the biomechanical models inside the crash test dummies are based on male data. There are very important differences of physical differences between women's bodies and men's bodies. First of all, of course, women tend to be smaller than men, but the important thing is that the size of the vertebra is smaller, and of course they have a less muscle. So the distances between the vertebra is slightly bigger for women than for men. And then also there are different patterns in different kinds of injuries in different types of collision. And the last picture on the slide it's a figure created in Australia which shows you what you should look like if you want to survive a car crash. And it's called Graham, because it is a man. So three things happen during the car crash. The car gets into the barrier, your body crashes inside the car, and then the third crash, the most dangerous one, is when all the organs inside, the bones and so on, crash into each other. This is the most dangerous thing. So, over the years, because the cars were designed to allow drivers to drive faster, and it is men who drive faster than women, the seat itself became harder and stronger in order to protect the person and keep it in the place the seat acts like a trampoline in a car crash, and the body is shaken, and therefore the injury patterns for women, because of the vertebra and so on, are much more severe than they are for men. So this is examples that certainly the injuries such as whiplash is very well known that it's much more severe and more frequent for women, and this is because of this interaction between the scalp, the neck, the vertebra, and their upper spine. There are different forces and different reactions to the forces that happen in the car crash. They are not comparable. Women are not scaled down men. So when people scale down crushed as dummies, they are not represent women, they present smaller men. So the safety is designed and regulated by legislation, and legislation in Europe says that really the safety should be tested on the average man. Not on the average woman, on the average man. Yes? So we're concentrating on deaths, and we're not concentrating on injuries. Is it because women's lives are worth less? Hence, we cannot design and produce a female crushed as dummy. It is something that women don't know about. Yet increasingly women purchase cars, drive cars, and they do not know that the cars are less safe for them. And yet at the same time, in Europe, they have to pay exactly the same insurance rates as men do. So there is really something wrong in the system. And I think the first priority is that we should really look at the women as different individuals from safety point of view to men. And you have seen the picture of Astrid Linder, who is the leading scientist and researcher in this area and activist. And I've been trying to invite her to as many events that I organize, because this is such an important issue that shows gender as a cross-cutting issue. So technological innovation is what is favored instead of a social innovation, and the more technology is put in the car, the more the car is supposed to be safer. But of course, that's kind of a false sense of security, yes? Because if you give the driver more information about the conditions of the road and performance of the car, in a sense you give the driver, a male, an idea that actually he's in control of the car. So in about 2010, there was a study done in America which looked at the patterns of accidents and injuries and segregated the data for women and men, and showed that women had a 47% higher risk of injury in a car crash than men. That study was criticized on the basis that it just took all the cars together, and some of them were old, and therefore actually if you looked at the new cars, the data will be different. Well, actually now people did look at the new cars, and the cars produced 2009 and newer are actually, in a frontal collision, women have over 70% higher risk of serious injury and a fatal injury. So the cars, new cars, are even less safer for women than men, and we really have to understand why. And a lot of it has to be with the design of the safety system and the design of the seat, and not being tested on women. So I think one has to start looking at it from a different perspective, take a perspective of a gender being a cross-cutting issue. It's a social issue. We do tend everywhere prioritize the needs of men over the needs of women. And when you look at the reports that are produced about post-crash responses, there's hardly any attention to the gender issues. And yet in all those 5 circles, if you look at them from the perspective of gender, you will see that there's actually a need for having a gender analysis included when one talks about responses to crashes, and looked at the injuries to women and men as with equal importance as one is looking now at the issue of deaths. And the same thing about prevention. We have many actors involved, but legislation is what drives it, but this is not really enough. In red, I have just outlined certain things that can be improved that will benefit both women and men. So we really have to put gender analysis into all those reports. And we have to include social innovation. Social innovation is not valued the same way as technological innovation, primarily maybe because social science is dominated by women and technology is dominated by men, and hence it is valued less, but it can be very powerful in changing behavior. And this is one example from Kenya when it actually worked. So in the future report, that call to action, it is my strong recommendation, bring the gender experts in and include gender analysis for the data. We need more reports like this, someone that actually looks specifically at the gaps in data and opportunities. Better safety systems for women, it's an opportunity for industry and for society. We can learn from the Swedish experience. The Swedes are very good in mainstreaming gender into policy. And there's a huge amount of experience how to do it effectively. And there's also safety as an opportunity for empowerment of women. If I know that I'm safe on the road, that I can go and not being attacked on the bus or on the road, then that gives me an opportunity to go and work and participate in economy and society on the same terms as men. But also, this is an example of a woman who set up a company to deliver blood from blood banks to hospitals. And she employs a number of drivers in order to do this. So, my priorities for this conference is we really need female crash test dummies to demonstrate that we value the lives of women on equal basis to the lives of men. That we need to really look at the gender as a cross-cutting issue, that it has got an impact and influence across all aspects of transport and mobility. We really have to make a legislation equal for women and men. We need a multi-stakeholder approach and maybe use the community of practice approaches. And we need to just reframe how we talk about safety. It's a safety as a need, but also as an opportunity. There are people buying fewer cars, they might want to actually buy safer cars. And so the safer roads is something that is very good for society and for women. Thank you. Oops, overrun a bit.
Thank you very much, Elizabeth. I'm sure that there are plenty of questions burning in the minds of our audience. So we will start with the panelists, and I would like to start with Nan, given your experience as the head of WHO Safety and Mobility. How do you see the importance on the need of collect disaggregated data by sex and to disseminate that data once we collected it?
Thanks, Carla. To give you a very quick answer to your first question, I think it's extremely important. I mean, you cited earlier that the majority of crashes and deaths are among men, but we also know that the impact of those deaths are largely borne by women that actually have to carry the burden of surviving without having to compensate for the income and so forth. So I think that in itself is an important piece of data that we already have and we're starting to have. I think the data, the disaggregated data is extremely important, and we are seeing more efforts to collect it. But the truth of the matter is that there is a dearth of data in this area, and I would like to challenge us to go even further. I think that having data on the impact in terms of who's dying, where they're dying, why they're dying, all of the things that Elizabeth has cited is extremely important. But I think that there's a need for us to go even further down. I think that that's just really the tip of the iceberg. When we look at why mobility systems are designed the way they are, it's not just a matter of saying, how do we make these systems more friendly for women? Yes, we know that women are less likely to take public transport because of security issues. But to me, that's not the fundamental question we should be addressing. To me, the question is, what kinds of mobility systems do women want? And how do we actually ensure that that feminine perspective, 50% of the population, as you rightly said, that perspective is integrated in the overall designing and planning of the systems? And for me, that means that we have to start to address institutional biases that are reflected in the systems. We know very well the reasons why the safety standards are requiring the dummies to be tested on men and not on women, because there are inherent biases. And this is true for other populations as well. You know, when we talk about equitable access, we talk about the need to have people that don't have cars to also be participating in the transport system. That, again, is part of the institutional bias. And so for me, I think, yes, we absolutely have to get more data, but we also have to be able to address the issues that we can't see very well. And it's very hard to have data that looks at why these biases exist, to what extent do these biases influence our perceptions, and how they influence the way that the systems are designed. So I think that that's also an area where we need to start thinking about. Absolutely, let's get the data. There are initiatives. Sustainable Mobility for All has a gender working group. You're part of that, you're leading that, that's excellent. We at the WHO are trying our best to collect more data, both in terms of gender, but also in terms of access by different populations. But let's also shift the attention to the systems and the inherent biases that underlie these systems. And let's start to ask the question, again, vulnerability is a function of systems. So unless we start to get there, unless we start to get at the data that looks at why those biases exist, I think we're not doing enough.
Thank you, Nan. So clearly, first of all, we need to understand that transport is not gender neutral, and regardless of how obvious that might be, that was not in the mind of everyone years ago. So with the systems, or talking about the systems, let me go to Leah. With your experience on implementing precisely the Vision Zero in other places, or to bringing Vision Zero system to other places, how do you see this, let's say, gender bias, or how do you see the lack of gender focus coming into this implementation?
Yeah, thank you. And our work is mostly at the local level, so it really is, less about the far-reaching national and international policy, which is so important, and more about what is that planner or engineer or policymaker doing in that community on the ground, right? And I think one big piece I'm recognizing more and more is, as you're saying, how absolutely the systems change. Even from the start of what are we talking about, mobility is a means to an end. This transportation system and all the pieces of it, it almost feels as if it's this end in itself. It's this, giant complex of pieces that is very kind of rigid, etc. And I think to step back and say, why do we have this, right, to get where we need to go? And then you say, okay, let's look at different communities. People are different, right? We know that on average, as I understand, men's trips are generally longer. Women's trips are more frequent. And obviously, this is not everyone, but overall, women make more but shorter trips. But then let's look at how, at least in my country, in the US, how we fund projects and the types of resources. We spend far more money and energy and space, and frankly, in my opinion, do much more harm disproportionately building giant freeways, connecting suburbs to office centers, to city centers for these longer commute trips. And of course, commute trips are important, but we're not investing in the safer, smaller, more flexible trips to the market, to the childcare, to the park, to maybe it's part-time jobs in the city, et cetera. So thinking about even those trips. So I think we need to reframe the question. And I'll say, I feel like I would be remiss if I did not say explicitly, I know this is focused on gender equity as it should be. In the US, I'd say we're grappling much more directly within cities around racial equity, and that the numbers, the attention, the data, and the experiences we're seeing are much more stark around low income, and then communities of color being wildly disproportionately impacted by traffic safety, and their voices and actions are not so much in the mix. So to me, I really think of those together, and I don't think I could talk about the gender equity without talking about the racial equity too. So I just wanted to add that in.
Well, then let us hear more about mobility challenges then, as you are pointing them out, from Agnes. 10 years ago, Rwanda was facing worse figures in terms of road safety. However, it has changed a lot over the years. How do you see the health sector engagement on bringing that change into the patterns and behaviors of mobility in Rwanda?
How I see it, I think it's a multi-sectoral approach in a way. I don't see the transport sector not being allied with the health sector, even finance, because it costs so much. How many roads we can build if we didn't have to care about all those people injured or who die in accident? So what happened in Rwanda, the Minister of Health with the Minister of Transport, with the Minister of Internal Affairs, the police, to make sure the law are enforced, work on the issues. Meaning, we studied together, the three sectors study where people were dying or were injured, and fix that place. Sometimes it was they need bomb, or sometimes they need another type of road. And sometimes it's just to put a policeman there without anything to just slow down the people. So they work together to solve that problem. That's how the rate of incident went down. And there are other things that have been done. Before, people with a good work had a car at work. And when you broke the car at work, you don't pay. So now, no car, Charwa zero. It has changed a lot. Because now it's my car, don't touch it, because I had to pay, and maybe I will sacrifice my holidays. So there are a lot of other activities done around road safety that has bear fruits. But enforcing the law, working together across sector, and use data. Because don't tell me we need to dig more to have more data. Let's use what we have. Huh? We could stop any study and just study how you are going to implement what you have. Because it's just pretext to do nothing. Let's use what we have and work on it. Understand also that women's life doesn't matter. That's a reality. I'm so sorry, but that's the reality. Not only in transport, in everything. Did you see the last, how do you call that? The Global Gender Gap report that was issued 2 weeks ago? So they study everything, the gap in politics, the countries who are doing well, etc. They study women death, but you know what type of death? Only maternal death. We are interested just to produce babies, not for the other things. It's another machismo. They pretend to serve us, they don't. So I think we just have to be awake about that, take some feminists with us, and go and fight for having the right place. And it's not only for transport. Do you know that all drugs you eat, madam, are tested on young men? Can you imagine that? So I'm not surprised with what I'm hearing here. It's just a global fight, and numbers doesn't say everything. Because I would like to read all the laws in a country like yours that is doing well, and even a country like mine which is doing well. We have 61% of women in parliament. I will want to read which laws are really gender equitable, and what is what we have to fight for. So no more data, just go and work with what we have and change the world.
Well, with that, on that note, Matthias, I think that it's a perfect moment for us to hear from the experience, the very good experience, very well-regarded experience from Sweden, in precisely bringing not only the systems and the data, but using it in a way that is conducive to see the real parity in terms of taking decisions.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much, Carla. Thank you so much for the question. And thank you for bringing up this topic. I mean, it's so important. And it's like everybody saying, we're talking about crash test dummies, it's designed for men. Why? Agnes talking about the same thing. But you know what we have done in Sweden, I'm pretty proud of it actually, that when we came into power, we stated right away that we are a feminist government. Meaning also that we had equal numbers of ministers, men and women. That is very important. And that is very important also to show political leadership. We stated that we will have a feminist foreign policy. Now, if you remember that in the beginning, that was a lot of discussion in the world community. What is this? And what is Sweden doing? And will they persist? Yes, we do. And it turns out to have been really, really good. Now, if we look upon what's happening in my sector, in infrastructure and transport, now we are very, very determined that we need to change perspectives here. We need to include the gender issue into all our decisions. And not only that, we cannot waste all the talent that can waste it if we don't do it. So what have we done? Well, I said political leadership is really, really important. And it's just sometimes big words, but you need actions. You need actions, otherwise nothing happens. And how do you take actions? Well, for instance, when we make a budget, we always have to give an analysis of gender aspect for every proposal I go into my Ministry of Finance. Otherwise, they will not even look at it. I'm in charge of big authorities here in Sweden. Transportation administration, aviation administration, maritime administration. They are all headed by women. The general directors are women. The highest paid general director in entire Sweden is from the transport administration. She's even higher paid than the supreme commander or the chief of a military. And that is something that is really, really important. That is a big statement. Because that, if the top executives have has that kind of power, it will spread down in the organization. And something that I'm really proud of, Carla, is that in 2001, our parliament, and I need to read it so I don't make any mistakes here. So we have a long history of objectives for gender equality in the transport system. So in 2001, the Swedish parliament established a goal, and it was formulated like this. The transport system shall be designed so that it meets the condition of and travel needs of both women and men. Women and men are to have the same opportunities to influence the intention, design and administration of the transport system, and their values are to be given the same weight. Now, we did that in 2001, and that is something, no matter which government has been in power, is something that we're very keen on. And that is something that we are striving for. That's why Astrid, for example, she's one of the world's leading crash test stomachs experts. That's why we see what's going on here in Sweden, that we see the professors, academia, civil society, we are all joining hands and go forward because we cannot and should not waste opportunities that we have when we include both women and men in all our policy areas. So that's my statement from the Swedish government. We need to do it. It might be a little bit hard in the beginning, but it's very simple. Same opportunities.
Thank you. Maybe it's not only about the same opportunities, but also to keep doing what you believe is important. We have heard a lot of very interesting efforts from around the world on trying to bring parity to the transport agenda. And then the paper says a lot, but when you see what's going on into the actions, we don't see enough. So what you are sharing is that Sweden has been walking the talk, and the importance of sustaining that effort is kind of critical. But before we go again to your comments, I would like to hear from Elizabeth, going back to your presentation, Elizabeth, because we can debate a lot about gender aspects in general, but I would like to bring us back to the safety aspects. And what you shared is not only data, it's data that has been collected through many years already. So my question is, what is preventing the world from hearing more about this? Why is it that we are not bringing this data with the same effort as we are bringing the rest of the data in terms of car crashes and death into low and middle income countries, for instance, let alone what is happening in the developed world? But what is it in your experience? How can we force with much more, let's say, clarity to bring up these numbers to everyone so women will be aware of what's going on?
Okay, so it is difficult. My experience and expertise basically lies in gender issues in science. You would think that scientists, being rational human beings and so on, would actually recognize gender bias in knowledge. They don't, okay? So I think we have to really accept that this gender bias is so pervasive in a society that showing real examples of it will demonstrate how we accept the world to be modeled on a man. I mean, the fact that NASA could not send 2 women into space because they had only one suit, and that was a male suit, yes, that shows you the biases, the inherent biases, and how expensive they can be. However, one has to work with organizations that have the power to introduce change, okay? And this power lies with politicians, okay? They can quite easily change the legislation to say that actually, given all the evidence that we have, safety of transport has to be tested for women and demonstrated for women. But at the same time, women as consumers of transport also have a power. Yeah? Women control about $25 trillion of annual consumer budget. That is a power, okay? So women have to basically go and ask when you're buying a car, has this car been tested for women? Is it as safe for women? Can you show me that it is safe for women in the way that is safe for men? If you don't, then don't buy the car. A bit like we have the labels for energy efficiencies on fridges and so on. I would recommend that we have the same kind of a system for safety of vehicles. We also need to educate people that they actually can take the action. So this example from Kenya is they put labels in buses, so when the drivers drive too fast, recklessly, and so on, the passengers are expected to tell the bus driver to slow down. And it has worked in Kenya. This is a social innovation. So I think we should not underestimate the power of the consumers, but also the responsibility of the people who actually deliver the safety systems. So it is the legislators, but it's also industry. Industry will respond to legislation. I mean, they have to, right? So it's a big market. I mean, I just think that it's such an opportunity. We really have to look at it as an opportunity to produce safer systems, yes? Seats that absorb the energy for women, okay? The headrests, if some of them work better for men and worse for women, I mean, if I knew this, if I'm buying a car, I would definitely don't buy it. So I think it's really, where is the opportunity for a change and where is the power? We just simply have to assume, and I agree with Agnes, bias exists. Bias against women exists everywhere, okay? But it doesn't mean that we have to tolerate it. It's just simply that that's a historical bias. It doesn't have to continue into the future. We have now enough knowledge, enough evidence, enough understanding, including scientific evidence, yes, to take this as a kind of say we cannot continue in the way that we have done so far.
So just maybe to add to that list of recommendations, I think that bring diversity to the safety agenda is key. We cannot longer be just one type of mindset thinking for the rest. And clearly your example from Kenya, and I believe there are other examples about the importance of behavioral changes that are coming from the fact that you are thinking differently, and then you are asking others to think differently, but not because you as a man or as a woman has one mind set, but a way of telling the people, if I empathize, if I understand where are you coming from, if I understand you as a user, it's easier than for me to bring the solutions or to think about solutions. And for that, we need men and women together thinking around solutions. So diversity matters a lot for road safety, and I think that we must start pushing for those changes. Nan was asking first, and then I will go to you. Yes.
I will be very quick, and I want to respond directly to what you just said, also to what Leah said, and also to what Agnes said, because I agree with you. There's a lot of data out there, but my point is exactly that I think the data that we have is quite superficial. We can act on it, but how do we act in a meaningful way requires a slightly different piece of information. It's what Leah was saying. You were saying that really what we need to understand is actually not whether or not poor people or women or men have access to X, Y, and Z. It's what is the experience that they have, and how do you respond to that experience? And I would challenge you a little bit, Carla. I don't actually think that the objective is to get men to empathize with women. I think the objective is to do what the Swedish government is doing. It's to give women or the rightful opportunity. I do not believe I, as a man, will ever relate to women's experiences or needs in the same way that we will. I have 3 older sisters. I am a feminist from a lot of points of view. But I also appreciate that it's not my job to plan a system. Again, I'm not here to plan a system that is friendly for women or friendly for poor people. The only way you're going to get that to work is if you actually have women in the driving seat, equally arguing, and that's how diversity works. It's not about saying, really, you should try to understand what women need and then make a system for them. No, it is you taking a shared responsibility and sitting here and having women have that opportunity to make that decision. And it's the same for what we talk about people. I mean, we had a discussion about why cities are so car-centric. Well, it's because cities were designed with people who had money and cars in mind. We're not giving the people that don't have access to cars the same seat at the table to articulate their needs and their experiences. So that's why I think we have that issue.
Agnes.
I just want to add on this. We can do that, but we should be educated. And don't believe you are educated after 30. It should start at primary school. Why do we don't learn all those biological or anatomical difference between women and men? And if you really want to make the difference, teach starting kindergarten, primary school, secondary school. How many years a medical student spend at the university without knowing that it's so crucial? So that means it's good that you put all those in place, but your colleague in education should revolutionize education to make it gender equitable.
Elizabeth.
Right, so I completely agree, but I think there's something about experience. Even women don't really know what it is like until you are in that situation, what it is like to travel on a public transport where you have 2 small children, a pram, shopping, and so on. Yes? And there are stairs, there are no lifts. Yes. So I'm kind of saying that I have 3 sisters, so I understand women, it's one thing, but we do not really understand the mobility requirements of different, sorry, I'm not accusing, different requirements. So there is a way of bringing this into the dialogue. There is a methodology developed at Fraunhofer where they bring people from outside, lay person. They are there for idea creation. And then these ideas are taken by industrial designers, and very early prototypes are done. And those prototypes are taken to the engineers to validate them that this particular equipment or whatever it was discussed can be actually turned into a product. So they, for example, in a case of rehabilitation, 100 ideas were produced. The engineer says that 90% of those were valid and could be turned into products. Well, if we have things like injuries and so on, we need to bring those people into the room to discuss what does safety means to them. And we have methodologies to do that, so it doesn't have to be such a big thing. And then we bring the different actors together, and then they can see that there is an opportunity for them to actually make a change.
Matthias, you wanted to add.
But I think you're absolutely right, Agnes, that we always have to start when they are small. Now, if you go out here in Stockholm today, hopefully if there's nice weather, you will see a lot of male carrying baby strollers here. And that is also something important, because then, as you said, you experience something, and that all you take into your work, or some of the people are maybe within the local authorities or whatever. So that everything we need to make sure that we have, a gender balance in every segment of the society. Now, for me, when I got my first kid, I took 9 months off from parental leave. It was the most amazing time, but also the most challenging time also. But you will see it that now, for here in Sweden, a lot of male do take parental leave, and that you shift the society. You actually shift the society. Now, crash test dummies for have me 180. I think is that male 180 is the model. But then again, children. From boys and girls, that's the same thing. And now, we experience and we need to have the academia teaching us also, but we need to have it included in all parts of society, from the very young age to the grave, so to speak. And that is something that we are trying to do here in Sweden.
Let me just finish before we go to the public of the audience with Leah in terms of, do you see that the safe system approach, it's enough for us to bring precisely all of this data that we know and all of these challenges about diversity and the needs of the users? Is that at the front of the system?
I mean, one of the things that excites me most about the safe systems approach, many pieces, but it is a paradigm shift, and I think the elements are there to do what you're saying. I'll say 2 things related to that. Anecdotally, and I don't have any data to back this up, but anecdotally, in my experience in the US, if I were to sit on a stage like this, or a stage in the US talking about transportation 5, 10 years ago, it was me and a bunch of men, generally, engineers and planners, and very few women. Today, I'm sitting on a lot of stages at the local, state level talking about Vision Zero and safety, and it's predominantly women. It is, so I'm finding it really interesting, and I think there's a reason for that, and I'm going to go ahead and gender stereotype here. We've talked about data a ton here, it's important. What Vision Zero is doing in our communities is complementing data with experience. I mean, we've talked about it, but let's not let the data rule our lives. We have plenty of data, as you said, plenty. We're not using it very well. But as importantly is things like, what's the data not showing? Because those voices aren't at the public meeting. Well, at the public meeting, we should have childcare, and we should schedule it at a time that people can get to it and not far away, and all those things that we know about engagement is very, very tailored towards certain communities that have more means and access and political voice. So I think Vision Zero, just by its very nature of kind of the urgency, and part of it is emotion. Let's not be afraid of that. I want to stand up and tell you how awful it is, you know, to know someone who's been hurt or injured, to have been hurt or injured. And I feel like we've almost engineered the experience and emotion historically out of the transportation system. And I think women are better aimed or better facilitated or such to bring that back. And I think we are bringing it back.
Thank you very much to our panelists. Let us hear from the audience. I believe there must be a lot of questions. So do we have the mic? One over here. It's hard for us to see you guys, so please just wave.
Thank you. Thanks for the panel. The reality, though, is that the number of deaths on the roads are out of balance. It's mostly men that are dying, men that are causing the crashes, particularly young men, 18 to 30. How do we address that? What is the cause of the behavior of men on the roads? And how do we address it? Do we address it in the schools, in the homes? What is the solution?
Let us take another one, and then we will go for the answers. I think that there's a lady here. Yes, thank you.
Thank you very much for your presentation, Elizabeth. But you kind of brought another light to my thinking about engineering and gender. I have a bit of bias for kids because I'm a road crash survivor. And in that crash, I had my 3-month-old baby is a boy. So I'm wondering if it were a girl that I had in the car, would the car seat and say, our life, you know? He was in a car seat. So my question would be, would you recommend that we begin to consider gender analysis for the engineering of car seats? Because if we're looking at what is compatible, if I had a girl in the car, would the girl have survived like my son survived? So that's my question. Should we kind of extend it? Because I have a bit of knowledge in road safety operation in Angola, Nigeria, and in the US. So people are using car seats. People are not surviving. The rate of injury that they're sustaining is quite more than what I expected when you are in a car seat, for example. Thank you.
Thank you. Who would like to go for the first question in terms of, I believe the man was trying to say whether diversity matters in terms of the causes of the of the men having crashes.
Yeah, and you know, you all know more than I do on this. I think partly I think what the Safe Systems approach is addressing is based on all this data and research and experience. We know certain things. We know high speeds kill, right? We know speed is the biggest predictor of danger or real damage. And we know men are more likely to speed. And we can, you know, smarter people than me in psychology can look at, you know, is that the way they were raised? Is that, you know, nature, nurture? There's a million things there, but it's a reality. So if we're building communities that encourage higher speeds, you know, men are more likely to go even faster, risk-taking, et cetera. So how do we, I'd say it's less about education. I think we've overemphasized education and enforcement and not enough around the systems like the design.
Can I just add to that? So thanks.
Very quickly, so we can go to the second, and there are 2 more questions.
Let me just clarify Elizabeth's points. I had said that I have 3 sisters, and that doesn't make me qualified to actually plan on behalf of women. That was my point. Even with 3 sisters, I'm not qualified. And I think, to answer the gentleman's question, from my perspective, the answer is very simple. I think that it's not about looking at the outcomes at that level. It's actually looking at how the system is designed. Leah had said, you know, we in the United States, they still build a lot of highways when there is a need for short distances. So my answer to you, have more women be involved in planning the systems. Because I believe, and I know that the minister from England did not want to say this yesterday, but I do believe that if you put women in the driving seat, if you will, the systems would look very different. And I would venture a guess to say that they would probably be safer.
Going back to the diversity, it matters. So Elizabeth, would you answer the second question?
Well, I just been to Japan. In Japan, maximum speed limit, it seems to me, is about 30 miles per hour, which is a very frustrating thing to do if you're driving long distances, and they drive very small cars. So basically, you cannot drive fast. So one way, it's very hard to change behavior, but we can design cars in such a way that in a particular situation, they will not drive faster than it's safe to drive fast. So changing behavior, especially of a young people, is very hard, especially young men. But education is one of those things that could be done from a very early age to actually being awareness what reckless driving is. In engineering, yes, we have to change the engineering and bring more women into engineering. The way we think about engineering and technology, let's just put some more functions into a car and more computing power into a car, and then you have a safer car. Well, no, yes, because the basic models that we use for testing safety are not really adequate and don't have the data that needs to be to demonstrate that they're safe. So engineering has got very few women in, and I think bringing women in would make a difference there.
We have time for three more questions. In fact, one here. Where is the mic around here? Thank you. And then there is another one here, and one up. So if you kindly be aware of that. Thank you, please.
Morning, everyone. Just from the previous comment and coming back to the title of the talk itself, ensuring equity. So maybe it's aspirational, but I think it's not about just gender. It's bringing along the intersectional approach. It's not about just children. It's about age. It's like looking at our older populations at the same time, people with disability, non-binary gender. And as aspirational as it might sound that we are still talking about women versus men, I think we need to move forward from that conversation. Thank you.
So where is the question?
Comment that can we discuss about equity overall?
Okay.
So just equity. Maybe that's my question.
Thank you. So I think we have another question in that side.
Hi, I'm Alejandra. I'm representing here the International Labour Organization, and I wanted to maybe take on also that to accelerate, not only ensure, but accelerate equity and gender perspectives. You need women not only planning, but also operating the systems. And I wanted to make a special emphasis on women in the transport workforce, not only at the leadership levels, but also from a down-up perspective, And in this sense, also maybe get some reactions on, yes, there's data, but the importance of international standards on defining what's violence and harassment. For example, ILO Convention 190 just recently adopted, What's a range of continuum of unacceptable behaviors in the workplace? And why are women, in some cases, deterred maybe to enter the transport workforce? Thank you.
Thank you. Is there a question also sorry?
Well, just the reaction maybe on, yes, it's important to have women in the planning part, but also highlight the operational part of the transport workforce.
Thank you. Before we go into that comment, maybe the last question. Oh, there are two more questions. I think we have time. Would you please make a question? I mean, we really want to hear from you, but it's important for everybody to hear the questions.
Okay, hi. Something that I realized when I'm driving, for example, a lot of times my car would break down and I wouldn't know what to do. For example, changing the tire. And I would wait for people to help me. So I think my question is, what can be done to ensure that both genders know what to do when the car breaks down? Maybe having education in place when people get the driver's license on how to, for like car maintenance, for example.
Thanks. The last one.
Thank you. I just want to find out what can be done about engineering roads for women, especially in developing countries, because I know in my country, for instance, I see it every day, that the highways are made in such a way that women have to cross over curbs. You see what I did? You have long curbs, pillar-like, And women have to cross over those. And sometimes you have communities passing, and the discomfort of having to drop your load, especially if it's in a village, and drop and cross over and pass your children across. So it's the engineering content of roads. And I think that is something we may have to also discuss a bit. Thank you.
Thank you. So to go to the last question, Leah.
Two thoughts on the last question. How are we engineering safety into engineering more? One is the training. Again, I'm speaking from the US context. It's shocking to me. By the way, I'm not a planner or an engineer. I'm not very technically minded, so that helps sometimes. I'm looking at the training that people go through to become an engineer, traffic engineer. The safety piece, I mean, there's safety throughout, but it's not a major component. So number one, if we can bring safe systems as the founding basis of a transportation engineer's studies, that's going to change things, right? So bring more women into the field, yes, but what they're learning is most important. And then number two, back to this piece of, I haven't said advocacy yet. I think it's really, we're talking about leadership, of course, elected leaders and leaders of agencies. I'm finding in Vision Zero in the US, the most important leaders are at the community level, and they're the ones showing up and demanding change. And how do we set up community engagement, again, in ways that people can come and show their emotion and desire and urgency, which will then cause change, and say, they're the ones who know, this street's not working for me. It may not be a black dot on your map, it may not show up on your high injury network, because people are so scared to even go there. So the data's not telling the full story. But again, if you bring people in, and you welcome more women into that community engagement piece, I think we are going to influence the engineering.
The question on the operation, women coming into the systems as operators.
Yes, well, there is actually a European platform for women in transport. It's available on the web. You can check it out. It's actually promoting that perspective of women employed in transport, but also in the companies that they are employed in, how does companies then try to change and produce a number of case studies that are available. So there is a practice being developed, and I think we should be aware of this, but not the people obviously not aware of this. I think at the end we're probably talking about standards. We're talking about engineering, then we talk about standards. And and prevention. So that figure that I had in one of my slides, that's kind of lots of blobs of green blobs in the center of the safety. I think what I would like to come out from this session is a call for a report. How do you mainstream gender across all those different areas, including standards for audits of road designs? Are they as good for women and men? Why should women have this difficulty of crossing a road? So if we then have perhaps it's something that Sweden can take on, to have just to demonstrate what it would mean to have a kind of a holistic gender mainstreaming effort into policy and design and standards at each aspect of their road safety and use.
So with that, let me thank all the panelists and the audience. I think it's very clear the importance of engendered transportation and paying attention equally to men and women needs when it comes to safety. With that, thank you very much.
Thank you.